Okay, well, good evening, everybody. You're all very welcome to this talk. And this is the first lecture of the 35th anniversary year of the Society. So it's very special. And all the more so because our speaker tonight, Craig Morrissey, is from Newfoundland and Labrador. And as you can see from the screen there, he's going to talk to us about resources for family tree research there. So it sounds very interesting. I'm really looking forward to hearing what Craig has to say. And Craig, you're very welcome as
Oh,
a
well, thanks so
family
much.
historian.
Well, thank you so much. And good afternoon from Newfoundland. Uh,
Oh,
we're 3.5 hours behind you folks. It's about 4:30 here.
mm,
Um, there's a lot of unique things about my province, and I could go on and on and on and on about it. One of the unique things is that we actually have our own time zone. That extra half hour is the Newfoundland time zone and sets us apart from in a lot of ways from the rest of North America. Um, So I am so pleased to be here. It's truly an honor, and I know it's your 35th anniversary. Congrats on that. And I'm a member of the Family History Society of Newfoundland and Labrador. We I'm a board member. I actually arrange lectures just like this from our end. And in October past, we celebrated our 40th anniversary, which was quite enjoyable. Um, I guess I'll start doing a little bit of a backstory about who I am and how I got started in genealogy. So uh, every time I think about this, I always come to realize that at about the age of 7 or 8, what caused me to become involved in genealogy was a root vegetable. And from a family Bible I was looking through one time when I was that age, a little clipping, a newspaper clipping fell out. And lo and behold, it spoke about that my paternal grandfather had arrived at the newspaper office with a 5-pound turnip that he grew in his yard in the family home that's along the north shore of St. John's Harbor, St. John's being the capital. And I remember at that point in time reading this and thinking, my gosh, we're famous. I mean, we're absolutely famous. How come people don't know about this? And so I always think that that was probably the seed that got planted for me. And as time went along in my life, I kept on thinking, I think that turnip is going to be the only thing we're going to be known for. But fortunately, not that we became very famous, but I always joke with people that if we ever decided to design our own uh, coat of arms, certainly a turnip would have to be right in the middle. Um, I I've always had an interest in Newfoundland history and my own history. I have books here that I was given as a little kid that I would never ever part with. Um, and sometimes I wondered why I didn't go down the corridor in university and do a history degree. But I ended up doing a psychology degree, and I ended up in the disability rehab counseling field for 34 years. In the background, I was still very much involved in reading about Newfoundland history and getting involved in genealogy of my own and other people. Um, but in 1998, my brother, I have one brother, his name is Pat. He gave me a call and asked if I'd be interested in doing a 10-week course at the local university in the evenings, one evening a week, about about family tree research. So I said, sure, let's go. Well, from the first moment of the class, I was hooked. And to quote the wonderful person, her name was Elsa Flack, who taught it. The first thing she said was, if you're here to discover whether you are related to kings and queens, it's been my vast experience that you'll discover the exact opposite. And indeed, that's probably happened in a lot of my family history. So as I worked in my other career, I decided to complete my professional learning certificate in Canadian genealogical studies from the International Institute for Genealogical Studies. And that was a very valuable experience for me and certainly made me a far better researcher than I was prior. And then about 5 years before I retired from my other career, I retired 3.5 years ago. I knew I wanted to step it up a bit. I was already doing genealogical research for people as they heard I was doing it. And I started my own business. My own business is called Morrissey Genealogy. And then about 2 years ago, I was at the provincial archives here, and the supervisor of the archives asked if I would go to work with them. And I said, I thought, well, I'm here anyway, and you want to pay me? Sure, why not? Let's go. So I worked part-time at the archives. I was there this morning, actually, working a few hours. And to round it out, I'm also a board member of the Family History Society of Newfoundland and Labrador, like I mentioned. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about a little bit about background about Newfoundland. I'm going to talk about some aspects of our history that will impact your genealogical research. And as well, I'll go over some major resources that I know that I use and a lot of people use, both online and in-person research. So the map there, as you can see, is of Canada. The red mark, it's not because we're a communist country, that's Newfoundland and Labrador. We're off to the east. The triangular shaped island, that's where I am as part of it. Labrador's to the north, it's part of our province. So we're stuck out in the cold North Atlantic where our winters can be long and unpredictable. All our weather is unpredictable for that matter. You get a cold current coming down from Labrador and a warm one from Gulf of Mexico, which results in the poor weatherman or weather person trying to predict what today's weather is going to be. Whenever I see a 7-day forecast, I call it the comedy channel. There's no way to predict it here. So I wanted to show you this because this is a very important document to me. Number of years ago, I found this. It was it's the marriage record of my first direct Morrissey, who came from Ireland. And it's dated the 28th of January, 1820. The Roman Catholic Church record in St. John's showing Matthew Morrissey of Waterford to Anne Mallard of Kittyviddy. Kittyviddy is a little fishing village that's actually within the boundaries of St. John's, still there. People still fish out of there. Witnesses were Edward Johnson and a Mary Aspel, and a Reverend Fitzgerald performed it. So that's my connection to your wonderful island. So this is Newfoundland and Labrador, a little bit more of a closer view. Again, to the north, Labrador, it is a large land. I've never been there personally myself. It's one of my goals to get there. A beautiful, beautiful area from what I understand. As far as the island goes, and I hope you can see my little pointer there. Can you see that? Can you see it, Shane? Yeah. So this right here, down here, is St. John's. And that's the capital of Newfoundland, and that's where I'm located. And it's an island that's actually quite big. It's bigger than people realize. If you drove from here to this corner here, it's called Channel Port aux Basques. This is where a ferry leaves year-round to go to Nova Scotia and connects us to the rest of Canada. But if you drove from St. John's to Port aux Basques in a petrol car, it will take you about 11 hours to get there. I know I need to do something because Shane and I talked about this last night. So the pronunciation of our province is always one that people get mixed up in. And if you ever wonder how you say it, I'll give you a 2-word rhyme. Understand Newfoundland. And that's it. That's how you say Newfoundland. I hear different variations, Newfoundland, but it's, and I actually hear people from Canada call it that. But yeah, just think of understand Newfoundland, and there you go. This map shows a lot of the more major communities, but around the island here, there's a lot of coastal communities. a few in the interior, like Grand Falls, etc. But yeah, so not sure how many folks attending today's been to Newfoundland, but we'd love to see you. And as far as I know, come April, there's going to be they're reintroducing direct flights from Dublin to St. John's, so it's always great news. So let me talk about what I call Newfoundland and Labrador History 101. So these, again, are going to be some factors that would give you a better understanding of our province and what may impact any family tree research you wish to do. So like many places, we were first populated by indigenous groups, and today we always acknowledge that we are actually living on the land previously occupied by those people. One of the first non-indigenous people to arrive were the Vikings, who stayed for a brief period of time around the 11th century. And if you think back to the map I just showed you, to the very top of the island, there's a place called Lansing Meadows. And back in the 80s, there was a discovery of a Viking settlement there. A great place to visit as well. In 1497, Giovanni Caboto, as we anglicize it to John Cabot, arrived on our shores and discovered a vast ocean of codfish. And so from that point on, we became a summer fishing station. So crews from different places around the world, not only Britain, but would come here and they would fish. They'd come in around May. They would fish off our shores. They would dry their fish on land. It was salted cod mostly. And by November, they would head back to the European shores. The reason why is because by then our shores were closed in by ice, made it very cold and somewhat inhabitable. And trust me, in the middle of a winter here in Newfoundland, sometimes when you're behind the operation of a snowblower like I own, you still wonder why we stayed here. So one of my jokes is these Hallmark movies could never do a romantic scene in Newfoundland in the winter because it's nothing romantic about a 50-kilometer-per-hour wind and 15 centimeters of snow hitting you in the side of the head. Hard to say I love you in a gale. Most of the folks who came to Newfoundland, came from the southwest corner of England, the Devon area particularly, the southeast corner of Ireland, and also the Channel Islands. They came from other areas as well, but that's some of the primary areas that folks came from. There's also a French population. The French did fish here, and there was a treaty dispute here back in the 1700s and 1800s. A little unique thing is to the south of Newfoundland are two islands, St. Pierre and Miquelon, and they are actually owned by the country of France. They're just off our shore. You can take a little ferry there that takes about 45 minutes. And who I worked for many years before I retired was a national Canadian company. And I once told them I was going to France for vacation. And they said, how long? I said, 3 days. And he said, that wasn't very long. I said, no. They said, did you see the Eiffel Tower? And I said, no. Didn't see that building at all. But they didn't know I was in St. Pierre. I wasn't over in proper France. But in the early days, the British also saw that the fishing grounds here was also a good training ground for the British Navy, for future members of the British Navy. Settlement was not encouraged at all. A lot of the merchants who are based in England, that southwest corner, were very protective of their premises here. And although there was a movement afoot to ban settlement, it never really took hold. And after a while, the merchants thought it would be a good idea to have people winter over to protect their premises or their equipment here. And so that was really the start of it all. And so when you look at why did people come here, there was one reason they came, and that was codfish. It was the fishery, plain and simple. It was the fishery. And most people who came here either came here directly or indirectly involved in that industry, fishing, or some came over as servants and whatnot. But rest assured, that was the primary reason. and it was a big contributor to the British economy. A question that I get sometimes is, what was the impact of the Irish famine on the population of Newfoundland? And in fact, it wasn't great at all. And that's for a couple of reasons, actually. Number one is that the vast majority of our Irish population were already here in terms of numbers. They were here. They settled, they stayed. The second reason, and this is from stuff I've read as well, is that we weren't really on a main shipping route, except for coming to get fish and bringing it back. My understanding, a lot of the Irish famine ships left and went to places like Boston, New York, Montreal, etc. But we weren't like a main route. And although we undoubtedly probably got people here indirectly, it didn't actually create a big impact to Newfoundland. To look at our settlement, the first census is the John Berry census of 1675, which basically looked at property ownership here, and it captured mostly, just mostly men, the men who were here, and maybe the numbers of people in their household. Some other census records throughout the years, colonial office records that are available in some of our resources we'll talk about, also have some property type of census records as well. But for many years, we were a dominion of Great Britain, plain and simple. An anomaly in terms of our history is that particularly in the 1800s and the early 1900s, there was a big out-migration to Boston and New York. And one statistic I always like to throw out to people is that in the 1920s, they estimate there were 30,000 Newfoundlanders in the Boston area alone. I know I had a great uncle who left on a fishing schooner on the south coast of Newfoundland in about 1910, and he went to Boston and he never returned. He married and settled there. I never met him. But the population in Boston and New York was so great that they had their own formal social clubs, the Newfoundland clubs they were called, and they had their own newspaper called Newfoundland Weekly. And we're going to be talking about that in a few minutes when we talk about some of the resources. Another bullet point I have, there's a Royal Newfoundland Regiment. So in World War I, again, remembering that we were not part of Canada, we raised our own funds to develop our own regiment that we sent over to help defend the empire. And those records are also available. We'll be talking about that too. But it had such a significant, it's a cornerstone piece of our history on this island. And, when you read things like the Battle of the Somme, there was a battle there in a place nearby called Beaumont-Hamel in France. If you go there today, I was there 2 years ago, there's a wonderful war monument. And there was like over 800 Newfoundland troops that day went over the top on July 1st, 1916. And I believe the number is about 70 answered the roll call the next day. And they say that there wasn't a community in Newfoundland that wasn't impacted by that. And obviously that's going to impact your genealogical research too. After World War I, of course, there came a point in our history around 1933 where Newfoundland voluntarily gave up its democratic government. And that continued for 15 years. We were under a commission of government that was run by 3 members of the British Parliament, 3 local officials, and the lieutenant governor. And in the middle of that, World War II broke out. And so, and of course, that wasn't planned, but it created a boom economy here in that Canadian and United States military set up some military bases here. And it was part of an agreement with Britain and the United States of a ships and bases agreement. So there was a huge U.S. military base here in St. John's, a Canadian one as well, and other parts of the island. And how that impacted, say for genealogical research, is that during that period, thousands of Newfoundland women married U.S. and American and Canadian military personnel and moved away. So sometimes if you lose somebody in your research, you want to look at the Canadian and American census records. So World War II wraps up. The British Empire is in dire straits financially, and they can no longer support a place like Newfoundland in terms of grants and whatnot. So it was time for Newfoundland to decide its future. And there were a couple referendums that were done. The second one had two choices on it, basically. One was a return to self-government, however, with the understanding that the British government can no longer financially support us. And the second was confederation with Canada, or as I like to say, we allowed Canada to join us. So that referendum to this day creates debate for people. And what a couple of things people don't realize is that, number one, we only joined Canada in 1949, so we're the youngest province. And secondly, that the referendum was very close in its count, in that the breakdown in votes was approximately 51% to 49% to join Canada. It was very, very small. Now, my belief, personal belief, joining Canada was the best thing that happened to us, and we're proud Canadians here and stuff. And except for July 1st, something I should throw in here. On July 1st every year, it's called Canada Day. But in Newfoundland, in the morning, it's Memorial Day because of the Battle of Beaumont Hamel, the disaster I told you. In the afternoon, we'll party about Canada. So coming in late to Canada, what's one of the advantages from a genealogical perspective? Well, in 2024, Canada just released the 1931 Canadian census. But we were under British rule, and the privacy rules are different. So for an extended period of time, we've had access to the 1911, 1921, 1935, and 1945 Newfoundland census records, and they are available on resources we'll talk about. And so whereas Canada still just got, the rest of Canada just got 1931, we've been, it's great for looking at people who left, but it's like, well, we've had this for quite a while. But my last bullet point here on this slide is resettlement. So when we joined Canada in the 1950s and 60s, a controversial program was developed by the provincial government here under the auspices of the first premier, Joseph R. Smallwood, who was premier from 1949 to 72. But they realized that they couldn't possibly financially support every single coastal isolated community around the island. And there were hundreds. And a lot of these places were only accessible by boat. So they created a resettlement program where they would compensate people to relocate to larger urban centers. And to this day, it's still seen as a controversial piece. But I mentioned this particular aspect for family tree research in the fact that if you do have ancestors here and they lived in an isolated community, they may have actually moved to a larger center, like a place like Grand Falls, Corner Brook, St. John's, etc. So your search would need to expand a bit if that community got resettled. So that's my little professorship in Newfoundland and Labrador history. And before we talk about the actual resources that are available to you, I want to give you a little bit of the background in terms of how records are organized here. So prior to 1892, births, marriages, and burials were only tracked by the churches. Civil registration came in 1892, but in the 1940s or 50s, somewhere around there, the government at the time went back to the churches and said, if we gave you 10 to 15 cents per entry, would you fill out our forms for your birth, marriages, and deaths prior to civil registration? And Many churches did it. There's a great treasure trove of databases on that are available online. I know the finding aid at the archives where I work, it's about this thick for that one alone. The Catholic churches, for some reason, didn't participate as much as other churches. It was a bit limited, but there are some in there for sure. Okay, so let's get to some of the resources that's available. And of course, I would start with family search and ancestry. So as undoubtedly we're all very familiar with these websites. They pretty much have, in terms of these types of records, they have the same records. So it's your choice which one you want to use. The census records for 1921, 35, and 45 are there. The 1911 one isn't there. It's on another resource we'll talk about momentarily. The 1911 one only survives in about 7 parts. For some unknown reason, other parts were destroyed, and we don't know why. But there's only parts, but it's not available on either one of these resources. There are civil records for births, 1891 to 1923, marriages, 1891 to 22, and deaths from 1891 to 1949. Those church vital statistics of births, marriages, and deaths, 1753 to 1893. Those are those records I had spoken about a moment ago, where the churches were given 10 to 15 cents per entry to go to fill out the governmental forms for the pre-civil registration. On family search, there are some Roman Catholic Church records for St. John's and some of the surrounding communities. And as you see, there's some of them are the other communities besides St. John's are Babels, Fairland, Flat Rock, Placentia, Portugal Cove, Salmonair, St. Bernard's, and Torbay. So they're actually on family search. There are scans of the original church records that you can look at. So they're very helpful. So obviously, being a board member of the Family History Society, I'm going to talk about the Family History Society of Newfoundland and Labrador. Again, we had our 40th anniversary last year. Similar to yourselves, we have free monthly lectures. You can join in person if you're in St. John's, or by Zoom. It's 7:30 p.m. Newfoundland time on the 4th Tuesday of each month. We run from September to November and January to May. If you wish to join the society, it's $45 per year. Well worth the money, in my opinion. That's $45 Canadian, by the way. It's you get a quarterly newsletter, which we always accept submissions about family tree research or articles about Newfoundland history. With your membership, you get all back issues of that newsletter. That goes back to 1984, and it's searchable. And also recordings of all the past lectures. We did a large headstone transcription project in 1998. That database is available to members online. And we are constantly updating our records for members on our website. When I work on Saturdays at the Provincial Archives, I can count on seeing one of our board members, David Pike, coming in the door at 10 a.m. And he takes pictures of records at the archives, things like court records, voters lists, miscellaneous deeds and wills, government records, census records, basically anything David can get his hands on, and he'll upload it to the website. Real plug and a big event for us is this July 25th to 27th in St. John's. We are holding a genealogy conference, the first one we ever did. There's a separate website for that. It's rockboundroots.com, rockbound roots being our theme. We are adding guest speakers now as we're reaching out to people. I can tell you that our keynote speaker is David Allen Lambert. I'm not sure if you're familiar with David. He's the chief genealogist with the New England Historical and Genealogical Society. We chose David for a couple of reasons. Number one, because of that outmigration of Newfoundlanders to Boston. And number two, David has Newfoundland roots. So it's an opportunity for him to talk about that as well. So if you're interested, please look up the website, and we look forward to seeing you here in our wonderful, wonderful province. So this is a very valuable website many people will access. It's called the Newfoundland Grand Banks. It is a wonderful website. It's run completely by volunteers. It's been on the go for many years, and they have transcribed thousands of records. I always consider it an excellent starting point in conducting any family tree research, following which, if you have access to it, to look up the original records from the transcriptions. But it has things like some cemetery transcriptions, church records, vital statistics, an index of wills, and that's going to help us on something I'm going to talk about shortly, another resource. Census records, directories, just to name a few. It's great to go in there, look around. There's photos. I once found a picture of my maternal grandfather who served with the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. I knew instantly he was there. Somebody wanted to know who it was. Their relative was in the picture. And before I knew it, I had contact with a gentleman in Connecticut in the US, whose 2 times great uncle was the other gentleman in the picture. So very useful website. Like I say, and it's free. It's free. I hope I'm not going too fast. I just want to say as well, Shane, at the end of this too, I can send you my PowerPoint if people would like to have copies of it. All the websites that I'm talking about are written in there. So by all means, if you just want to listen in, it will be available to you. So the next resource I want to talk to you about is the Rooms Provincial Archives in Newfoundland and Labrador. It's where I work part-time, and if I'm not on one side of the desk, I'm on the other, doing research for clients of mine with my business. So on top of the page, you see a part of the skyline of St. John's. And to the left on the top, that pointy-looking building with the glass in the middle is the Rooms. And that houses the Provincial Museum, the art gallery, and the archives. It's a rather unique shaped building, I fully admit. It's shaped, those 3 peaks you see are shaped to represent fishing rooms, or the sheds that fishermen would have down by the shore that held their fishing gear, and it's all connected. Some people, I love the building. It's tremendous. And for people who question about the design, I always say that when you go inside, you'll never look at the outside the same again. Absolutely spectacular views. I know, especially from the archives, if you get a chair by the tables and you look out the harbor, it's just majestic. There's a little joke I like to share with people who come to visit Newfoundland, especially when I'm at the archives. So you'll see on the skyline as well the 2 peaked building to the right of the Rooms, and that was the Roman Catholic Basilica Church. And so there's this joke of a tourist who's taken the street that runs in front of the basilica and the Rooms, and he asked the cab driver. He pointed to the basilica and he said, "Well, what's that building?" He said, "Well, that's the basilica. That's the head of the Roman Catholic Church in Newfoundland. The Archbishop lives there. It opened in 1852, et cetera, et cetera." And the tourist said, "Well, that's amazing." And when he got in front of the Rooms, he said, "Well, what's that building? That odd-looking building?" He said, "Oh, I think that's the box that the basilica came in." But the Rooms, again, it's just a wonderful, wonderful place. They do have some online resources, the rooms.ca. There you can look, search through their photos and some other general collections that they have available. To augment those death records that go up to 49, a couple of years ago, we added death certificates from 1950 to 1968, which are extremely helpful. And you may recall me talking about the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. Through the Rooms website, there was a massive undertaking a number of years back where the service records, the original service records, have been digitized and searchable through the Rooms website. I love being involved in projects that have the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. I really do. I just finished one recently for a lady in Ottawa, and her 2 times great uncle, in the middle of his war records, was a 3-page description of when he was a prisoner of war in a German concentration camp. And the details of his capture, his treatment in the camp, and then released when the war was over, and how he made his way home. I told her it should be a movie. You don't know what you're going to find in those records. I know my maternal grandfather, there are some letters in there my brother and I discovered when we first arranged it, or accessed them. 2 were from a nurse in Air Scotland. He was injured and he went to Air Scotland. 2 are from a nurse in Air Scotland who contacted the commander of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, wondering of the whereabouts of Private John Skinner. That's my grandfather. So needless to say, whenever I look at my updated DNA results, I always keep a close eye on whether I have any Scottish connections. And the last piece of paper that's on there was a letter to the commanding officer from a gentleman in London, who said that in his absence, my grandfather had been visiting his wife, and his wife had now left him under the assumption that she was going to Newfoundland to marry Private Skinner. And Private Skinner doesn't understand that my wife is a Mrs. and not a Miss. So, and a little aside too, I calculated that my grandfather was actually engaged to my grandmother at that time. So, funny guy. So you don't know what you're going to find those records in person at the rooms, like any type of repository. Only a small amount of the records we have been digitized, but on top of everything, we have a ton of parish records, those church vital statistics, delayed birth registrations that may have come in. Church civil vital statistics records, census records, directories, company records, family histories, court records, an incredible map library, newspapers, just to name a few. Sorry, if I can just rewind a little bit. I just want to mention one thing regards to ancestry. Their website, newspapers.com, as of today, this date, there are no Newfoundland newspapers on there at all. However, I do have good news about that for you. In St. John's, and it's not a great picture there, is a sprawling Memorial University of Newfoundland. It's only a few minutes away from where I live and where I attended university. And I just want to talk about 4 resources within MUN. Memorial University of Newfoundland, the acronym is MUN. So if you hear me say MUN, it's Memorial. The first one is a great database that's online, that's accessible to you. It's a Digital Archives Initiative. It's a free collection of a ton of different types of digitally archived records, including newspapers, artifacts, diaries, letters, audio and video recordings, books, maps, periodicals, photographs, and yearbooks. You can word search it. In a lot of cases, in a document that comes up, it'll have it highlighted. But one of the things I wanted to mention was the newspapers. Although not an absolute complete collection of newspapers, it has hundreds of newspapers there. And so fear not, that is not on newspapers.com. A ton of it is on this website. A lot of times, if I find, an obituary, a transcription of an obituary, I'm onto the DAI, as I like to call it, the Digital Archives, and I'll look for that original obituary. Another collection or another resource and memorial is the Center for Newfoundland Studies. And they have a variety collection of various documents, books, government documents, periodicals, newspapers as well, theses and historic maps. Many of these are available digitally I would encourage you, if you go to their website, there's a one search tool on the top of the screen where you can put keyword search to see what's available, whether it has to be in person or you can look at it on computer. My last point I put there, I only put it there this afternoon because I did a smack and I couldn't believe I forgot this. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with Dr. John Mannion, geography professor at Memorial University, now retired. He has a website called the Mannion Collection, mannioncollection.ca, where it is basically the database of his research into Irish migration and settlement in Newfoundland from 1750 to 1850. You can look at it by surname, by community, where they came from in Ireland, where they settled in Newfoundland. And John's notes, they're all pretty much on index cards. It doesn't take too much to decipher some of his abbreviations and whatnot, but it really has knocked down walls for me when I've been doing research for folks. So that is a tremendous, it's such a credit to Dr. Mannion that he did it and he put it on a website, and it is absolutely free for all of us to use. So valuable database to say the least. Another resource through Memorial University is the Maritime History Archive. So any type of history of maritime activities in Newfoundland and Labrador would be there. It's located on the campus, but they do have their website. You can look at a bunch of things. Something I find quite interesting, they have crew lists from the late 1800s. I think they rescued them from the British Museum back in the 80s or 90s when they heard that they were being destroyed, and they couldn't collect them all. But I know I have found ancestors of mine and my maternal grandfather on there working as a cook on a schooner. Very great thing. There's also a database, the Keith Matthews name files. So Keith Matthews was a professor at the university who died way too young and unexpectedly. And he was collecting family names of Newfoundland. And so it's a good resource to look into. They're very brief entries, but nonetheless, well worth to take a poke around and have a look. My last bullet point there, we call it the Gertrude Crosby collection, after the lady who did this. On the website, it's called Birth, Marriages, and Deaths from 19th Century Newfoundland Newspapers. Gertrude Crosby was a lady who sat down and went through every Newfoundland newspaper in the 1800s and created a database of birth, marriage, and deaths that were announced in those publications. You can actually purchase that database from the Maritime History Archive. I can't remember what the cost is now. I know I have it. I've had it for a number of years, but it's such a great resource when you're doing your research, because then, when I find it in her database, I go to the Mon Digital Archives website and hopefully find the original newspaper where she got it from, and then and download the newspaper. And the last Memorial University resource is Archives and Special Collections. Now, they're by appointment only. It is in person. What they have is a lot of rare and I guess sensitive material that they don't have online. However, if you do come to Newfoundland at any point, you're in St. John's, what I would suggest beforehand, go on their website, use the one search tab of their website to see what they have, make an appointment. A good friend of mine named Linda White works there. Set up an appointment. They'll get the information for you, and you can go visit them, and they'll let you have a look at things. I know one thing Linda told me is that our first premier, Joseph Smallwood, I had talked to you before, they have all of his collection, including his baby boots, his bow ties, and everything else in between. So a great place to drop into as well. Trusting I'm not going too fast. I know we're on a bit of limited time, but still, I want to fit as much as I can. So So the Provincial Resource Library is a main library here in St. John's. It does have some genealogical resources. A lot of their stuff isn't digitized, but I wanted to point these guys out because they are the main repository of newspapers in Newfoundland, and they have the biggest collection of anybody. What I find helpful with them is if the other resources that have newspapers, if they don't have it, but I know from the Gertrude Crosby collection, it's in a newspaper these folks have. Oftentimes I've contacted them if I can't get over there myself, and it's only a little distance away from me, that sometimes they'll look it up the newspaper for me and scan it and send it to me. So very helpful folks for sure. Very, very helpful. This resource is incredible. So back in the early 2000s, an American gentleman, for some reason, came to Newfoundland. Well, not for some reason to come to Newfoundland. There's always good reason to come to Newfoundland. But for some reason, when he came here, he took photographs of thousands of headstones throughout the island. And he created like CDs you could purchase, and he had a website. And for a long while, in order to access it, you had to pay to see photographs of these headstones. The good news is, in September 2023, he made it free. And so it's, you can poke your way around in there, and there's a database. You can look at a little bit of a coding thing. If you ever access this and you have trouble accessing it or find your way around, please, by all means, reach out to me. I can give you a quick primer on how to do it, but it's thousands of headstones, thousands and thousands of headstones. One thing I would tell you though, if you cannot find the headstone here, circle back to the Family History Society, because our transcription project predates this one. And so any headstones that may have been dilapidated, missing, or illegible by the time this gentleman got there, we may have the transcription anyway. So it's a good idea to circle back there. Supreme Court of Newfoundland and Labrador. Thankfully, this has been my only contact with the Supreme Court of Newfoundland and Labrador personally so far in my life. So they have a searchable wills and estate file on their website. If you know generally when somebody passed away and when they probably had a will, you can put their name in here and it will do a search 10 years prior and 10 years after. And if there is a positive result, and it'll show on your screen, for the low price of $20 Canadian, they will either mail you a copy of the original, a photocopy of the original documentation, or scan it and email it to you. So it's not a transcription. Little clue. I use that Newfoundland Grant Bank's website. I'll go into their wills index, see if it's in there, see if they've transcribed it, and have a look, and then I'll circle back and go to this website and order the original. Sometimes the transcriptions may be not quite as long as the actual file, especially estate ones. So sometimes what you'll see is a transcription of 2 pages, but the original file may have about 7 or 8 pages. So very good one to use. City of St. John's Archives. So this is for people looking at folks who are strictly in St. John's. They do have some stuff online, origins of street names, a photography collection, city directories from 1877 to 1973. Otherwise, if you come to St. John's, make an appointment to see the fine folks up there. I know 1 or 2 of the staff, and tell them what you're looking for. The city tax rolls are very useful. Fire and insurance maps, deeds, St. John's maps from the 1830s, voters lists from 1911 to 1966. city payroll records, and just a variety of stuff. So very friendly staff. They would gladly help you out. My next two slides are about the church archives. So none of the churches have their records directly digitized and online. I list these and their contacts for you in case you want to reach out to individual churches in the event that the other resources don't have the record you're looking for. I know I spoke to the Church of England Archdiocese office a couple of years back, and I just asked, I guess at the archives, at the rooms, we must have the same records you have. And I was told, well, no, actually, you may either have more than we have, or you may have records we don't have, and vice versa. And I was surprised to find out, for their church particularly, that none of the individual churches around the island are obligated to send their records into them. So, like I say, these are on the slides if you'd like to have a copy of it, of who the folks are to contact. These United Church and Salvation Army. Salvation Army records primarily are held in the Salvation Army offices in Toronto, Ontario. And community historical societies. So there's hundreds. What I would suggest to you, if you're on Facebook, do a name search of the community. Chances are there's a Facebook page. And my experience has been an incredible people who have an avid interest in their community and their family trees, and would only be happy to answer your questions if you have any, if you're looking up for any families that reside and still reside in some of these small communities. So by all means, don't hesitate to get on Facebook and look at that. So, okay. I know I've eaten up a good bit of time here. And like a true Newfoundlander, I can yak all day about Newfoundland history, or I can yak all day, period. So now it's your turn. So
Craig, that has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.